Prime Minister Modi, why don't you take some questions from the freest press in the world?
Oslo, May 19, 2026. The joint press conference is wrapping up. Cameras are being packed away. Two prime ministers have just spent 45 minutes discussing trade, renewable energy, and the future of the India-Nordic partnership. And then, a voice cuts through the room.
Prime Minister Modi, why don't you take some questions from the freest press in the world?
4 seconds of silence. PM Modi walks out. That was Haley Ling, a reporter from Oslo's oldest newspaper. She was holding a ranking in which Pakistan, where journalists are shot, sits above India, where Bangladesh, where hundreds died in last year's coup, sits above India, and where Palestine, where more than 220 journalists have been killed by Israeli bombs in 2 years, sits just one rank below India. That ranking belongs to Reporters Without Borders. Norway is number 1 on it and India is 157th. Haley Ling stood there with that number in her hand in front of the Prime Minister of 1.4 billion people. India had an answer. It just never got delivered properly. That same evening, the Indian Embassy in Oslo invited Haley to a press briefing. Radisson Blu Plaza Hotel. Ministry of External Affairs Secretary C.B. George, who also serves as India's ambassador to Norway, was there. The same clip from that briefing went viral twice. In India, the headline read, George demolishes NGO reports. In Norway, the headline read, Indian diplomat dismisses human rights organizations. Same clip, 2 headlines, 2 countries. That gap right there is the entire story. My name is Charu Singh and this is the Chronicles on Analysis Arc. Haley Ling, you asked 3 questions. India had answers, quite good ones. They just were not delivered the right way to the right room. Today, I'm going to give them properly. But first, you need to understand why this keeps happening. Because Oslo was not a one-off. This is a 200-year problem. September 2014, India put up a spacecraft into orbit of Mars. Rupees 447 crore, the cheapest interplanetary mission in human history. India succeeded in its first attempt. US, Russia, Europe all failed on their first attempts. The New York Times published a cartoon in response, a mustached Indian farmer, a tethered cow, knocking on the door of the elite space club, where 2 bespectacled white men sit, reading about India's mission. The New York Times apologized later, but the cartoon had already told everything about the default lens. A BBC anchor asked, ahead of Chandrayaan-3, should India be spending money on this when millions don't still have the access to the toilets? Nobody asked America that question before Apollo 11, and the organization that gave India rank 157th, Reporters Without Borders, receives a significant chunk of its budget from the French government, the European Commission, and the Open Society Foundation of George Soros, who have been publicly critical of India's current government. RSF's own founder once admitted the budget was primarily funded by organizations tied to US foreign policy. None of this means press freedom concerns about India are invalid. They are not. It means the lens through which India is always measured was built by someone else. For someone else's purposes. India has never seriously challenged that lens. That is the real problem. Back to Oslo, Radisson Blu Plaza Hotel. C.B. George had the opportunity to challenge that lens directly. In Scandinavia, in front of international media, he got some of it right. He pointed out that India gave women the right to vote in 1947, immediately after independence, before several European nations did. He cited that the G20 New Delhi Declaration passed unanimously by every nation at the table despite a world divided by Russia-Ukraine war. These are hard to argue points. But then he said this. People have no understanding of the scale of India. They read, 1 or 2 news reports daily published by some godforsaken ignorant NGOs and then come and ask the questions. In Oslo, in Norway, In Scandinavia, where NGOs are considered the backbone of the democratic society, Heli did not need to win that room. George gave it to her. The 17-minute response covered chess, yoga, Indian's constitution, and origin of civilization. But here is the thing about a 17-minute answer. If nobody stays for the last 12 minutes, the first 5 minutes is all that lands. And what landed internationally was godforsaken NGOs. George's core error was not what he said, it was where he was mentally when he said it. He was physically in Oslo. He was mentally in an Indian primetime debate. In diplomacy, you are always speaking to the three audiences simultaneously. The journalist standing in front of you, the international media that will write the headline, and the most importantly, the neutral observers, the policymakers, trade ministers, foreign secretaries of the third countries who are watching and deciding whether India is a reliable partner or a reactive one. George's answer served the first audience. It probably satisfied the second, but it lost the third. The neutral observers who need to see a confident, measured civilization, not a diplomat who sounds defensive. Diplomacy's golden rule, not anger, but composure. That was the answer that happened. Now, Heli, here is the answer that should have happened. Why should the world trust India? That is actually a fair question, and I appreciate you asking it directly. But trust is not built on promises. It is built on a pattern of behavior. Here is the pattern. January 2021, the world was desperate for vaccines. Wealthy countries had locked up the supply chains. India was running its own vaccine program, the largest in human history, and simultaneously shipped 235 million doses of COVID vaccines to 98 countries under the Vaccine May 3. Not as leverage, not in exchange of something, as solidarity. Norway's neighbors were among the recipients. 2023, the G20 was going to fail. The world was divided over Russia-Ukraine. Every ministerial meeting had collapsed. Even the UN could not agree on a text. India's Shepra team spent 300 hours in negotiation. 16 drafts failed, and the 17th one, posed by India, achieved unanimous consensus from every G20 nation. Russia signed it. US and China even signed it. Not because India applied pressure, because India was the only honest broker in the room that every side trusted. When the global south needed a voice at the UN, WTO, the IMF, India spoke. Not for India alone, but for 5 billion people who rarely are heard. Heli, that is the record. The question is whether you are reading it. Can you promise to stop the human rights violation in your country? This question is serious. It deserves a serious answer. First, I cannot make a constitutional promise on behalf of 1.4 billion people's judiciary, parliament, and independent courts. France government cannot either. Norway's neither. No functioning democracy can. The moment a leader makes that promise, they have violated the structure they are promising to protect. But here is what I can tell you. India's Supreme Court rules against its own government more often than most people are aware. Surveillance laws, electoral bonds, constitutional amendments are struck down. State access compensated. These are not claims. These are the public judgments. In English, they are available and verifiable. India's National Human Rights Commission receives over 200,000 complaints annually, and it has the legal teeth to act on them. Yes, failures exist, real ones, but so do France's, so do UK's, and does Norway's. The question is not whether violation happened, the question is whether the system has the capacity to correct them. India demonstratively does. And Heli, one question back. Norway has a $1.9 trillion sovereign wealth fund, the largest in the world. In October 2018, Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi was murdered with a bone saw inside Saudi Arabia's own consulate in Istanbul. a UN special reporter found credible evidence that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman ordered the killing. 2 weeks after the murder, Norway's Sovereign Wealth Fund CEO announced publicly that Norway would more than double its Saudi's investment. We invest in companies, not countries. Our investments in Saudi Arabia will not be changed based on political developments. I'm not condemning Norway. I am pointing out that every nation operates at the intersection of principle and interest. India knows this. Norway also does. Trust is not built on perfection, it is built on honest engagement. That is exactly what we are doing right now. Will PM Modi begin taking critical questions from the Indian press? Fair observation. PM Modi has addressed India's parliament more frequently than any prime minister in recent memory. Man Ki Baat, a decade of unscripted, direct engagement with citizens every single month. Parliamentary accountability on the floor of both houses. Different democracies have different traditions of accountability. America has press conferences. Britain has prime minister's questions in parliament. India has both parliamentary accountability and direct citizen engagement. A press conference is one format of accountability. It is not the only one. And Heli, Norway's prime minister does not hold daily press conferences. Germany's chancellor does not. Japan's PM does not. Format of engagement varies. Principle of accountability does not. In 2024, 640 million people voted in India's general election, the largest democratic exercise in human history. That is accountability of the highest order. Now, a story, not about India, about the gap between Norway's self-image and Norway's behavior. When Khashoggi was killed, Norway suspended new arms export licenses to Saudi Arabia, a principled stand, and simultaneously announced it would double its financial investment there. Same government, same way. The arm trade was politically visible. Investment fund was not. I am not raising thing to score this point. I am raising it because this is what honest engagement looks like. It is uncomfortable. It is specific and it is true. India can handle that kind of conversation. Can everyone else in that room does? But here is the real answer to all the three questions. Not a policy document, a story. The year is 936 AD. The Gujarat coast. Zoroastrians fleeing Islamic conquest in Persia land at Sajanpur. Their choice had been simple, convert or die. They chose to cross the Arabian Sea instead. The local king, Jadi Rana, sent a messenger to them. The messenger carried a glass of milk filled to the brim. The message was clear. This kingdom is already full, there is no room. The Zoroastrian high priest, Dastur Nerusang Dawal, looked at the glass. He picked it up. He dissolved a spoonful of sugar into the milk. The milk did not overflow. It became sweeter. We will dissolve in this land the way sugar dissolves in the milk. We will sweeten it. We will not displace it. Jadi Rana gave them the land. 1300 years later, those refugees are the Parsis. Ratan Tata, J.R.D. Tata, Homi Jahangir Bhabha, the architect of India's nuclear program. India never converted them, never asked them to change. The promise, made in 936 AD, was honored for 1300 years without interruption. Heli, that is India's DNA. We are Ashoka, we are Aurangzeb. We are the Constitution of 1950 and we are the emergency of 1975. A nation that can acknowledge its worst chapter in an honest nation. Honest nations are trustworthy ones. Now about the opposition. During an active diplomatic visit, India's leader of opposition tweeted internationally, "What happens to India's image when the world sees a compromised PM panic and run from a journalist's question?" Mahatma Gandhi had a standard. He said, "I criticize my country loudest at home and I defend it most firmly abroad." Apply the Rawls test. the wheel of ignorance. If the BJP had tweeted the same thing during a Congress Prime Minister's foreign visit, the world would have been one anti-national. History's greatest diplomats were respected because they were honest about the gap between a nation's claim and its reality. That honesty is what builds trust between nations and between people. September 11, 1893, Chicago. The world's parliament of religions. An unknown monk from colonial India with no official invitation, representing a country that did not yet exist as a free nation, walked onto a stage in front of more than 6,000 people. He had no notes, no credentials, no official backing. He said 4 words: Sisters and Brothers of America. The entire hall rose to its feet. The applause lasted 2 minutes and then said, I am proud to belong to a nation which has sheltered the persecuted and the refugees of all religions and all nations of earth. That was not poetry, that was history. He said it with confidence in 1893 when India had nothing, no army, no parliament, no passport, not even independence. In 2026, when India has Chandrayaan UPI, the world's largest vaccine manufacturing capacity and a seat at every major table, we respond to a Norwegian journalist with a 17-minute lecture about NGOs. That is the gap, and Oslo was the moment to close it. Nehru said in 1947, a moment comes, which comes but rarely in history, when we step out from the old to the new. India's soul is still finding its voice, sometimes loudly, sometimes peacefully, never completely, but it is searching. Heli Len, you were doing your job. Today, I did mine. Leave your answers in the comment. If you were there in that room, what would have you said? And if this analysis was worth your time, like it. It helps more than you know.